Welcome to Becoming Mama, the podcast where two long-lost best friends dive deep into the incredible world of motherhood. I'm Emmy, your host for all things birth stories.
And I'm Sam, your guide to the transformative path of matrescence.
Today, we're going to be talking about our first 40 days, or as some would call it, the postpartum period. First 40 Days is a book. You can go look it up. But I think Sam and I are just thinking it's a really beautiful way to label that postpartum period, or that time after your baby has arrived and you are getting to know motherhood, whether it's for the first time or subsequent babies and times.
That fourth trimester per se as well.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to dive a little bit into our first 40 days stories for both of us. We're going to share the highs and lows, and we're going to talk about things like nourishment, rest, bonding, mental health, healing, recovery from different birth situations that you might find yourself in, or that we found ourselves in, like recovering after a C-section or after a home birth, what it's like to be a person who has just released another human being from their body. So I have had technically 4 postpartum periods myself. So for my son, that was in 2014, so he's 8 now. I had a miscarriage and what I would call, I guess, a brief postpartum after that. I went back to work just a couple days in. And then after both home births that I've had over the last couple of years here, I had one in 2018 and then one in 2021. So I will share during this episode a little bit about the differences between recovering in those different scenarios. And the preparation I did after my first postpartum, I did a lot of mindset shifting after that.
I'm excited to hear that birth story in a few weeks as well. But I have just one son. I have a 2.5-year-old Teddy. So I gave birth in April of 2021. Is that right? It was 2021. Yeah. I had just the one postpartum period, and it's a doozy. To say the least. Okay, well, we'll talk about our birth stories individually here in the upcoming episodes. So the next 2 episodes will be our firstborn's birth stories. And so we'll talk more about that at that time. But in the first 40 days for me, it was I would honestly say it was like a downward spiral. I was super blissful in that first day. Yeah, the adrenaline was high. I was infatuated with him. Like I was lucky to have that immediate connection where I was talking to my mom about this yesterday, where she was like, I never disliked being pregnant. I wasn't ever ready to be done being pregnant. I love being pregnant. And I was like, I loved being pregnant too, but I was just beyond ready to meet him. Like I've always felt like we were so connected. And whether we believe in them or not, I've met with a couple mediums just by happenstance, and they've talked about how like we're like our souls are connected, my son and I, and that he's been waiting for me and all of this stuff. And so when he came here, I felt like I had just been waiting my whole life to meet him, and that I'd known him this whole time. And I say that all the time, where I'm like, of course it's you. Like, of course it's you. Like everything about you is of course. Like I've always known.
Like we need to do a Spirit Babies episode also.
Oh, I can't even imagine what that's gonna be like, because it makes me want to cry. But I was just so infatuated. And then night 2, the nurses came in and they were like, do you know about the second night? And I was like, no. And they're like, okay, well, it can be a little rough, like babies realizing they're not part of you anymore, and they kind of start to want, like, get a little more upset. And that was the case for us. And it was between Teddy, my son, not wanting to be laid down, and the nurses coming in every 35 minutes, I swear to God. It was just constant. And so then that was where I was like, oh, this is what they mean by no sleep. Like I literally got 45 minutes of sleep. And then the next night, same story. I was still okay because I was still riding that high. Like we were home the first time. And then throughout that first week, things started to get a little bit worse, where sleep was just not happening. I was very anxious, and I had a birth injury. So I couldn't like even walk around if I wanted to. And I think the not being able to was the part that really frustrated me. It was like, I want to be able to take care of my son, and I felt this intense need to be the one to take care of my son. And so that anxiety started right with there. And then our feeding issue started. He started to not latch right away, and then he started to like then the nights got worse, and I started to get extreme anxiety around nighttime, and I couldn't eat because I was so anxious, and I would wake up in the morning and be okay, and the days would be good, and we would bond, and it was beautiful. And then nighttime would come, and it was like me like bouncing up and down, shaking. And that went on for a long time. And then I started to just cry for no reason around that like 1 week postpartum mark. And then that I think my baby blues turned into something more. But it's so hard for me, and I would love to like unpack this at some point on this podcast too. I don't know how much of what I was going through was hormonal or was situational, because we had a tough situation where we weren't sleeping. He wasn't eating. Around the second week, second to weeks 2 to almost 4, he was cluster feeding every night, to the point where I had nothing left. But it wasn't cluster feeding. Now, when I look back on it, it was him being unable to latch and not being able to get food from me, and me not producing enough because he wasn't taking enough. So he was just trying to eat and he couldn't, and I wasn't producing. So it was just this like, he wants more, I have nothing. I feel like you just fed for 4 hours, and you did, but you were getting nothing because of his oral restrictions that I'll talk about again on another podcast. So we had that cluster feeding hell. Again, quotes if you're not watching the podcast, cluster feeding hell. And then I had to have surgery around 3 weeks postpartum on my birth injury, which I was actually stoked for, because I was like, I'm going to get to sleep. They're going to put me to sleep for 2 hours. So I slept for 2 hours. And then the healing was really quick and I was fine. But it was just like this constant, just like, on to the next thing, on to the next. It just felt like this spiral. And there was a lot of beautiful moments of like holding him on the couch and my mom being there a lot of the time and being able to watch her with him and to like watch me with him. It was like a really huge learning experience for me. And there's just so much I would do differently and that I've learned since then. But I would say overall for me that the first 40 days were just a net negative, which is I think what makes it really hard for me. It's like when you look back on that period, it's like there were great moments. There were wonderful moments. It was a love I couldn't imagine. And half of the time I cried, it was because I loved him so much. But the circumstances were just, it's hard. I think the hardest part about it, and this is where I get emotional about it, the hardest part about it is I look back at those circumstances and I'm like, yeah, they were hard, or were you just not strong enough? Like there are women all over the world who are in harder situations, who are in the NICU, who have twins, have like triplets, God forbid, like doing this with multiple babies, and I couldn't do it with one. And so that was it's been a really hard thing for me to overcome. And I think big thing, we can talk about this in another podcast too, is just how we minimize maternal strength and we look at motherhood as just something everybody can do, and we don't recognize how hard it is and how strong we become. And so I try to not focus on that as much, but I would say that was the summation of my my first 40 days.
Yeah, I think too. I remember tuning in. You shared a lot of your postpartum journey, which I think was really brave, especially considering how challenging it was for you. And I remember tuning in to a lot of your stories and watching a lot on Instagram. So if you don't follow Sam on Instagram, you can go follow her because she, posts a lot there and shares a lot of her life story, even through the hard stuff, which I think is a really incredible aspect of just your personality in general. But I also think it's really important to acknowledge what you shared, because so many women are going through that exact same scenario where, this baby is plopped into your hands. Everything you've seen is like, oh, it's blissful. It's awesome. You're off of work for however long, which I know that wasn't your scenario, but everything is great. And then you find out that like they literally can't be laid down. They only want to, they're still basically in you. They're just on you now. And none of us know what that's like unless we've done it before, and we've barely ever seen it, and nobody talks about it except for the random memes you see, and then you're like, I don't even know what that means because I've never done it before.
Yeah.
And so
I think that was a huge thing for me. I think that's a big mindset shift that I'm taking forward with me when we have our second, is like, yeah, baby's going to need to be a part of you and on you and with you, because that's what they need. I for some reason, I don't know what it was. I had to learn that Teddy had never done this before. Like you're a baby, you're supposed to sleep. Why aren't you sleeping? He's new. He's new to the world. He's new to all of this. He's trying to figure this out while I'm trying to figure this out. And that was something I learned early on, and it did make my experience easier. And it seems so silly, but like I think with social media making babies almost like accessories these days, it's like you forget that like they're not just a baby, they're a human and he's learning and he doesn't want to be set down because that's scary. Like imagine if you, a grown adult, were just laid on a hard surface somewhere you didn't know where you were in the dark. You're not going to like that. And you're an adult. Like it was just like a huge, I don't know if does that make sense? Where I was like, oh, this is a person. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
duh.
No matter how you cut it, no matter how much success you set yourself up for, there are still going to be challenges during the postpartum period. There's still going to be hard things, and there's also going to be, hopefully, in most people's situations, an equal number of beautiful blessings that you experience as well. One thing that just comes to mind that I have to share, so kind of going into my postpartum, I had wrapped up grad school. I had started my internship year as a school psychologist. And my I hope he doesn't watch this. My internship supervisor had said, "It's great that you're going to be doing that. You can work on your thesis on your leave." And I was like, "Probably."
I'm sure you did say that too. You're probably like, yeah, I'll work on all his sleeps, right?
I mean, I don't know, but maybe. Like, that's cool. That's a great opportunity. Yeah, that got done. I got an emergency extension. And so so it was like 2 years late, but I did graduate. Yeah,
oh
yeah,
my God.
Anybody who's ever written a thesis knows what that's like. But okay, so to go into Fox's postpartum, I have a similar experience to you in that I had kind of always felt this calling from this little being somewhere that I knew I needed to meet and find in reality in this real world. And so we always say, and we can share more about this in like the fertility episode we do in the future, Fox is kind of a miracle. I had the Implanon. It's like a stick they put in your arm, and I had 2 rounds of it, so that's 6 years of birth control. And he was conceived the week it was taken out of my arm, like the day after. And so yeah, it's possible, but the fact that I even like took a pregnancy test at that time, the fact that he like is even here is just mind-blowing. And also Zach and I had just done natural family planning workshop for our Catholic marriage ceremony that we were going to have. That same week as well. Sort of fell through. So that happened, conception happened, which led us to postpartum. And so the immediate part of my postpartum, I was asleep because I had been completely sedated during my C-section. And when they had started to wake me up. I think it was like to the point where it was like, okay, she should be waking up now, and the baby's really hungry. A lot of time has passed. They're like trying to wake me up. My pain was not well managed by any means, and so I was like, I don't want to meet him. Like I'm scared. I am literally shaking from head to toe from the anesthesia wearing off. And so they were like, okay, and then they just brought him in anyway. Thank God they did, because when they placed his little face next to mine, like the whole world just shifted. That total oxytocin rush. I feel so grateful that we were some of the lucky ones who bonded immediately. He was able to latch right away, and in terms of breastfeeding, he was able to get enough milk, even just right away, just colostrum, that he started spitting up even there in the hospital. But they had not really taken any thought into the fact that I was starting to get some really bad blisters. They just kind of thought that was normal, or that those would maybe just heal over. I don't really know what they were thinking, but I remember showing them and being like, I don't know, this kind of hurts a little bit. And so it turned out that his latch was like not quite right for whatever reason. And so we got home, and I don't know, that first night home, I'm sure is tricky for everybody. But I remember just like, I had a C-section, terrified to lay down in my bed, terrified knowing that I was going to have to go back to the hospital to get my staples removed in a couple of days. And my husband went back to work the second day we were home because he was starting a new job. And so I just wept when he left every day. Yeah. And my mom was able to come and stay for a couple days, which was really great, but also cried a lot when she left as well. But I had a C-section, I had a newborn baby, I had no one home with me during the day, and I had a box of cereal next to my bed. And that was pretty much how we made things work. I was able to get up and around a little bit, but it was really, really challenging. And especially with the filter of like, this was not what I had wanted. I wanted a natural
Yeah.
childbirth. I wanted things to have gone differently. I didn't want healing to be this hard. I wanted to do baby wearing like immediately. And so I remember messaging like the little support group and being like, how long do I have to wait now to be able to baby wear? And they're like, well, you should probably wait at least 8 weeks. And I'm like, like, I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
It's just all of the little things, all of the things that you had sort of created this picture or this schema in your mind of what this is going to look like, and now knowing that it's all completely different, that was so hard. But anyway, back to going to sleep that first night, I tried to lay him down in the little bassinet thing that my grandma had let me borrow that's like a family heirloom, and he just cried right away, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do. Every time I lay him down, he cries. And why didn't he do this at the hospital? Because at the hospital, he just slept. And so we tried like the swaddling and the different things. So I ended up, this is the part of the podcast where we're like not giving any kind of advice. Just sleeping in our living room chair, holding him in my arms and having my husband check on us. And then the nipple pain really came in full force, and that lasted for about 10 weeks. And I would venture to say that both of my nipples probably about fell off. That's how deeply cut they were. And every single latch was me screaming at the top of my lungs, holding onto my husband's hand as hard as I could, and fearing the nights, because it wasn't like that during the day. Like, I was braver, I was awake, but waking up to feed him in the night when you're so tired you can barely sit up and your whole body's sore from surgery, it was just like incredibly challenging. So fortunately, I had a couple pieces of support that made making it through that possible. The first was that I did start using a nipple shield, which is something we have like a Decora breastfeeding support group in my local area that I, very much hesitate to recommend unless you are super desperate. But that helped us a little bit. I was able to go to the lactation consultant to stop using that because I got to the point where not enough milk could really be released while using the shield as my baby got bigger. So needed to be able to leave that behind. But I was afraid of pain. And so made it really, really hard to move away from that, and felt like it was, really impacting our breastfeeding relationship. So knew I needed to get rid of it. Lactation consultant worked wonders. And then I had started to get mastitis also from the shield. And I had also been scheduled that same week to go to something called the Arrival Circle, which was a local postpartum support group of moms that were very like-minded to me, led by a local doula about 21 minutes away from our house. And I had paid, but I had decided that I wasn't going to go because of the mastitis creeping up on me. I was so raw and so just like muddled in my own pain. Decided to, the doula actually texted me and she's like, or she messaged me on Facebook and was like, I really think you should come. All of those things make me think you should really come to the circle. So I was able to get over there. I think like Zach dropped me off. It was in the evening and picked me up after, and I took my baby. And I remember the first activity we did was she passed around a basket of words, and you had to pick a couple of words and then use those words to share a part of your story that was meaningful to you. And I remember picking the word placenta because I realized at that moment that because I had had a cesarean and had been sedated, they had taken away my placenta and never said anything about it. And I had never been able to have the opportunity to see it or, do all of the things that people might do with a placenta. Generally not in the hospital, but sometimes they do. So this was just devastating. I just wept at this group. I just sobbed and cried, realizing this was just one symbol of all that I had lost in not having had a birth that was even remotely close to what I had wanted. And I think that sort of foreshadowed how challenging the postpartum period was going to be, again, because I knew that after 8 weeks I had to go back to work. I was just devastated to leave my baby at this sterile daycare center in our community that I didn't want to leave him at. We were fortunate to have been able to get placement there, and the women who worked there were wonderful. They loved him so much. And I was also super fortunate that I didn't ask, but I just decided to spend my lunch breaks there. So I would go and I would nurse him on my lunch breaks and spend time with him as much as I could through those days. But it was just such a challenging experience and definitely set the stage for my postpartum experiences to come.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I know you're pretty healed from that, from all of the work that you've done, but I'm trying not to cry. My heart breaks for you. And my heart breaks for you in the sense that that had to have been really hard for Emmy at that time. But I also know the power that it's given you in those future births and in just who you are as a person. My heart breaks for that, Emmy, but I'm so incredibly in awe of you, of how you allowed that to change you.
Yes. And I think most people that I have met in the world of birth work, birth story sharing, people who are on sort of like a healing journey themselves, will say if they had a traumatic first birth that they wouldn't change it. I had a massage therapist at one point, maybe I've shared this before, say, well, let's rewrite your story. Let's change it in your mind so it's better, so it's what you wanted. And when you go through something like that, you know, if you go through any traumatic experience, you know that someone new is rebirthed through the pain and the anguish and the sorrow and the grief of that experience. And you wouldn't change it because it makes you who you are and it makes you stronger. And I know that I wouldn't be where I am today had that experience not been the way that it was.
You can't change that story. Your brain knows a lie from a truth, and you can't do that. You just can't. You can highlight the positives, but along those same lines, I just talked about this in my YouTube video that came out this past week, is that I wish I would have accepted my circumstances sooner, because like you talked about, that expectation of what it was going to be like versus what it was, and all the trauma that came along with it was partially due to who my son was, how he was born into this world. He was born with oral restrictions, and he was born wanting to be with me. And I wouldn't change who he is for anything. And who he is going to become is also shaped by the things that he had to overcome early on in his life. I accept him fully, and he was meant for me, and I was meant for him. And you can't change that.
Yeah, and I think I can speak for both of us when I say that we accept the people we were then who made those decisions. Like, that was a much younger version of myself.
Yeah.
She had a much different view of the world. Her priorities and values were much different. And I can't change who she was, but I accept her for who she was, and the decisions that she made. So I guess from there, I can go into the other two. These are much more positive experience, and I think will be much more brief. Twyla also came to us. I mean, Twyla, if you ever meet her, she's 5 now, and she is the biggest, brightest spirit you might ever meet. She is like when the sun blinds you, that's her.
Oh.
And I could sense her for a very long time. Shortly after Fox was born, I could sense her, and then there was the miscarriage in there, and I know that wasn't her, because that baby had like a very different essence, I guess you'd say. And so Twyla has just been like knocking at the door trying to get into this world for as long as I can remember. And I had like a very distinct experience of kind of meeting her spirit in a very calm and beautiful yoga class. And I wrote about it, and it's somewhere on a blog somewhere that I published a long, long time ago. She finally was conceived and was finding her way into this world. And I knew that based on my previous experience, I knew I wanted a home birth midwife, knew I wanted a home birth, knew I was going to VBAC at home. The hospitals in our area have VBAC bans, so having this birth at a hospital in our local area was not even an option, and we could do a whole episode on that, but knew exactly what I wanted. I had a whole vision for what I thought it would look like. I wanted to give birth to her in our attached, we have like an attached bathroom, you know, like whatever that's called. Thought I kind of had an idea of how long her birth would be, because your second, third, fourth, whatever birth it is generally half the time of the birth you have before that. And so, it's going to be hard to like not tell the birth story, but okay, so fast forward, everything pretty much went according to exactly what I hoped. That story will be shared at a later date. Beautiful birth, amazing, triumphant, empowering, everything I could have ever dreamed. And so the immediate postpartum was, my glasses were off. I have glasses that I especially wear during my pregnancies, but wear all the time now, because I think pushing my babies out actually changed the shape of my eye somehow. I don't know if that's true. That's my perception. Don't really fit correctly anymore ever since I birthed my babies.
Wow.
And it's gotten worse with each birth. We were in the living room, not the bathroom, which was okay. In front of the couch, lights streaming in. I release this child from my body. She falls to the ground. If you ever watch a lot of birth videos on YouTube, you'll find out that this is actually very common and very normal. And one of my biggest regrets from the birth was that I didn't catch her, because I really wanted someone to catch her, even if it wasn't me. But she didn't. She just hit the ground. She was only about 3 inches from the ground because I was kneeling. And I looked down, squinted because I didn't have my glasses on. I think it's a girl. I think it's a girl. And I was right. It was. And we had thought that she was going to be a girl the whole time just because of her bright, sunshiny spirit. And I scooped her up and just started to fall in love right then and there. So a little bit of time passed where my midwife kind of like observed us while we kind of, Fox was I'm actually in the spot right now where she was born, if you're watching the video of this, but Fox was about 6 feet away in another entryway of the door. And his whole thing, he was 3 at the time, and even now he's observed 2 home births of his siblings, and he doesn't ever want to hear me make those noises again, but he will.
He says he will.
No, he says that he will not, but he probably will, because that's just how it's happened the last 2 times. And so he ran in to greet his sister. It was so magical, so beautiful. We were just leaning up against like a recliner, and then some time passed, and I decided that I thought I was probably ready to like release the placenta. So I got up and I sat on our little squatty potty, and I released the placenta into this glass bowl. And then Twyla stayed connected to her cord. Like, we didn't cut it for a little while. We got positioned in our bed. I took a bath, like a sitz bath. My midwife had brewed a whole bunch of really beautiful sitz bath herbs, postpartum herbs, to help with any tears. There's something called comfrey leaf, and you brew that, and it like instantly helps seal up anything that was a little bit damaged, the tissue that was damaged during the actual birth. And then we all just settled in, and it was so amazing. I just remember taking selfies, FaceTiming my family. We hadn't told anyone I was in labor. My sister was here. She helped with pretty much everything because she, at the time, was a midwife's assistant. And so she was an extremely valuable resource to have around. My husband took a couple of weeks off of work, which was really great. Because he was home for a little while, was able to help feed me so that I was able to stay in bed a little bit more. But after that, then I had to kind of like get going again, and I had to take Fox where he needed to go to daycare and stuff. I mean, breastfeeding was just perfect, beautiful gift. Twyla still eats well today. Thoughts on that one before I just kind of like segue into Evie's?
No, I'm grateful that you got that experience like right away. That's amazing. But yeah, let's hear Evie's.
Okay, so very briefly here, because I know we're probably getting to a lot of time here. So hers was more recent because it was in 2021. If I tell the story, I haven't really told it before much, so I might still actually be able to feel it. Sometimes when I tell these stories, I actually start to have like the contractions again. It's really crazy. So before she was born, I remember hearing on a podcast that women set the bar so low for their birth. Like, they hope they survive. That's what we're hoping for. Actually write a story of your dream birth. And so I had been thinking that Evie was going to be born because I had been having prodromal labor for like 4 weeks. So that means that every night around 7 p.m., I would start having labor contractions. That's what they felt like. They would be every 5 to 10 minutes. I would text my sister and be like, it might be tonight. And so that had been going on for quite a while. And so I had actually been like, okay, well, maybe there's something unresolved within me that I haven't quite figured out yet, and that's why she's not coming. I wrote this beautiful story of what I thought her birth would look like and what I hoped for, and pretty much that story happened, which was just super magical. To fast forward through the birth then, she was born in our bathtub, and my husband and I were the only ones in the room when she was released into the world. My sister had just gotten there. It was like 7 a.m. And I had told her for some reason to go and wash Twyla's hair. I wanted Twyla's hair washed for whatever reason. I don't know if I was just trying to distract myself or what. So my sister's like washing Twyla's hair, and we're like, hurry, come, because I really wanted the birth on video. But nobody was there to capture it, and that's okay. I think that's the way that it was meant to be. But I just kind of sat back in the bathtub. Evie was on my chest, and we started getting to know her. Eventually, after my legs sort of like the pain subsided a little bit, the contractions slowed down, the afterbirth contractions. I got out of the bathtub, was able to make it to my bed. And the main thing that was truly different about this experience, so I know this is controversial, but this was a free birth, so we did not have any midwife in attendance. That was our plan. That was exactly what we wanted, and we have a lot of reasons for doing that, but mainly because we had already done it before. and we had a pretty good idea of what it was going to be like, and we were just like, we don't need help. Like this is no problem. Also in my previous birth, when the midwife had come, my contractions had slowed down a lot. And so then she had to leave and come back. And then she had only been there just like right when the baby was born, which was exactly what we needed. It was exactly perfect. But for this birth, we were just like, this is not like a big deal for us. We know what we're doing, and I'll probably eat those words sometime in the future. I don't know. But the main thing that was truly different was that I had really worked hard. So for that second birth, my first home birth, I really put a lot of mental energy into planning. So for my first birth, I spent a lot of energy planning the superficial aspects of what that birth would look like. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I would wear, the birth photographer that I would have there, all of the like really the things that really don't matter in sense of the spiritual soul. So for Twyla's birth, the middle, I had spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted for the actual birth. And so for this birth, for Evie's birth, our free birth, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I would want for my postpartum, how I would want that to look. And that was especially great because this was the first time I wouldn't be returning back to work. I was going to be continuing to work from home. I didn't really plan. I took a week off, kind of. I still worked a little bit here and there, but had to keep up with posting for my clients their social media content, which was fine because my husband was able to take a month off. And so I did a lot of things like borrowing my sister's co-sleeper that was going to be right next to the bed. So that was awesome. I purchased a really cool organic food subscription that wasn't like you have to like make the meals or anything like that. It was like dips and nourishing fruits and vegetable stuff that would come that was already pretty much prepared that I could just eat, which made that a really amazing experience. And like I really looked forward to those. I was excited to eat that food. And then just planning out like having my husband there so that I truly could stay in bed, so that I could rest, so that I could heal, so that I could bond with my baby during that time. That was what I truly wanted. And I had my little laptop off to the side so I would work when I had to. That was the first time that I ever created space in my life to welcome my baby and hoped it would be a much more graceful period having done that. And it totally was.
That's incredible. That's my biggest, I think we'll talk a lot about this, but with me, I know our next is our last. Like it was a hard decision to even have a second for both of us. And for me, I think I could probably keep going, but I know with my husband, it's one more. And so, the pressure to have that, like that experience is hard. I don't know. It's just really empowering to hear you talk about the way you were able to know what you wanted and then make that happen. Even if it wasn't like, obviously it wasn't the first time and it wasn't even the second time, but just incredible. And I love the idea of staying in bed. That's the one thing I already talked to my mom about. I was like, I think I would love for Teddy to go to your house when I go into labor, like tell him he's going on a vacation because I want a week to just be in bed and be with baby. I don't want to worry about anything else. Not the house, not the dogs, not my body, not anything, but just resting, recovering, and evolving and allowing myself to get to know this little person before life has to pick up again, as it does. But that's so empowering to hear you say that you did that, because that's my biggest thing. It's like, I just want to be in bed and I just want to be with baby. And I just want to co-sleep. I just want to be together. And I don't want to worry about all the things I should do. And I love that. I love that for you.
Yeah. Yeah. They have both home birth postpartum experiences have been magical and manageable, and postpartum experiences that I would wish for anyone, for sure.
What do you think the biggest, I know we probably should wrap it, but I want to just unpack a little bit. What do you think if you were talking to a mom going into this, whether they're giving birth in a hospital, at home, at a birth center, what are some things that you would take from your experiences for them to bring into theirs to make it a more positive experience?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of information about there, like plan your birth, but don't plan your birth, plan your postpartum, but don't plan your postpartum. I think having a little bit of a plan is really wonderful. And I also think having mental flexibility within that plan is also a really great idea. There's a lot of good resources out there. If you type it in on Pinterest, you can find like some postpartum planners that I think can be helpful. I think reading, I know that there's like a book, I think Fourth Trimester is actually a book out there that you could get and read and just just kind of like thinking about the fact that there's going to be something that, you know, like there's going to be this period after, and to think about how in your life and your circumstances you can set as much time aside for that experience. I love this company called Solku. It's a necklace and bracelet making company, and I'm always wearing one of their necklaces. But I got a special necklace for my postpartum period for Evie. And it was, the intention for it was gentleness and relaxation or something like that, because that is exactly what I wanted. So maybe even thinking of or picking a word for that particular time that you can keep coming back to, that anchors you in that space. And it's funny that we're recording this now, because Twyla had just found that necklace earlier this week, and she's been wearing it for about 4 days, and it broke. And I always say that when one of these necklaces breaks, a wish comes true. And I was like, what wish do you think came true? But there's just so much you can do and so much you can't control in the postpartum period. But if you have one place to think, you know, you can start with the freezer meals. Lots of people do freezer meals, and that's a really great idea. We did that for Twyla's birth. Just plan a little bit. Think about, you know, how you're going to nourish yourself during that time, and how you can set some time aside to actually bond in a spiritual way with your baby. What about you? What would you say?
I would piggyback on that, and I agree with the intention. And I would almost, I do a lot of work with values and micro values. So this is from Nikki McCoon, and it's, you have your core values, then you have your micro values, which are seasonal. So in this season, what are the things that will make me feel like this was a success, or that this was fulfilling? And so in that postpartum period, what are those micro values that you want to adhere to, that will make it feel like it was successful to you? So is that bonding time with baby? Is that rest time? Is that visiting family? Like, you really do want to go out and like take baby around? Is that, you know, getting out for walks? Like, what really matters to you in that experience? I know first time moms get a lot of flack, like you and I have talked about today. Like, we focus on a lot of the wrong things in our first time, because we don't know. And we don't know what's going to matter to us. And all those things that we're told would matter to us end up not mattering. And we end up like, well, this sucks. What do I do? Like, everything I prepared for, everything I planned for, my nursery is perfect. My rocking chair is perfect. The clothes he has are perfect, and they're washed. Oh my gosh, I washed all of the clothes that he didn't wear half of. You know, like all of these things that you feel like you need to do to prepare for baby, they prepare you in some aspects, but they're usually not what we end up caring about. And so having these conversations with people who have come before you, something that is so lost in today's society. Like, before, when we were going into matrescence, that we had guides, we had people, our elders, talk to us about the change that was going to happen in us and what we could expect. And so having these conversations and not feeling like you have to know it all. I think there is this, oh God, just moms in general, like, are often have this mindset that we're supposed to do it all. But then unfortunately, I think first time moms in the society we live in this day and age, where we have so much information, I think we feel like we have to know it all. Like, we should be able to learn and prepare, and we got this. We don't need to talk. Other moms don't know what they're talking about. The just waits, they don't know what they're talking about. When there's actually a lot of value in these conversations. And it's taking me, having gone through it, to be able to say, Emmy, I really want your tutelage essentially on my next birth. How do I make this better for me? And how can I glean from your experiences? And so talking to other moms about what their experiences was like, what they wish they would have prioritized and not, and then looking at yourself as a whole. What do you as a person value? For me, I do value productivity. And so if I were to say, I'm going to take that 12 weeks to do nothing, I would not feel fulfilled at the end. I would probably feel maybe a little rested, but I know my soul would be restless. And so being able to find ways to be productive in that season while still prioritizing rest, prioritizing bonding, and being able to align my choices with those micro values. So that would be my biggest thing, is like, get really clear and take that time to reflect on who you are and who you want to be in that season. Because you're right, you can't control everything that happens, but you can make the decisions that align best with you when you are faced with a decision.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is recognize that your values might change.
Yep.
After you have this new person in your world. Because that's one thing I did not realize was going to happen. I didn't realize that the instant our eyes met, my career was going to take a back seat. like all of that
Yeah.
education and training. And I know that that is not true for everyone. I actually have people in my life who would say that that's like the complete opposite for them, because maybe
Mhm.
that like protector instinct truly kicked in and they were like, I want to provide for
Yeah.
this person. It's different for everybody. And I love how you shared that. You shared it so eloquently. But just recognizing that truly, when you welcome this person, you are going to probably feel like a new person. I don't think I've met a single person yet who didn't say, like, oh, the old me was shattered and laying there on the
Mhm.
ground in pieces, and I was someone completely new when I gave
Yeah.
birth and had a child.
Yep. And I feel like a lot of people who do not say that are the people who maybe haven't come to terms with that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Where
Yes.
it's like, oh no, I just keep going about, but you watch them kind of struggle in the background and you're like, let it go. Like let this person come out of you. I can just see them in you, but you're just clinging so tight to who you once were. And I was that person. I was definitely that person. And I am so grateful to have leaned in to it now. And you're right, values change all the time, which is why I love the term micro values from Nikki McCune. It's like these seasonal values that change all the time. Maybe we can work on this together. I think it'd be really cool to come up with a practice around establishing values in pregnancy and in postpartum. That's simple and easy to do, but I think that reevaluating in those early days, maybe the first couple weeks postpartum, of okay, here we are now, and now what do I want this to look like moving forward, can be a really, really powerful thing. Because yeah, you're right, you change and you don't know until you know. I can only imagine that the things I valued the first time will be different than the things I value the second time. Well, this was a much longer episode than our others and will probably be one of the longer ones. Well, that was a little bit longer episode than most for us, but I hope it was as important and as healing as it was for me, at least. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, Emmy.
Yes, thank you for sharing yours.
And we'll be back again next week with our birth stories. So we'll be hearing the full story of Fox's birth, and then we'll talk about Teddy in the following week. So thank you all for being here. Be sure to check out the description for our socials, for our websites. If you're interested in any of our services, make sure to like, subscribe, give 5 stars wherever you can to the podcast. And if you feel like it's worth sharing, we'd love for you to share it with your friends and other mamas in your life as well.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We look forward to checking in with you again next week.